He was born in a storm, destined by prophecy. They burned his home, slaughtered his parents, stole his world. So he tore out his own eye, and the gods finally noticed. Now Eirik the storm-eyed sails the frost-black seas with rage, as his compass and vengeance as his only star. Will the broken branch hold, or will Loki's laughter drown them all?
In the deepest fjords of the frozen north, where ice clung to cliff faces like the fingers of dead giants, and the sun refused to rise for months at a time, there lay a village called Skjern. It was a place carved from stone and stubbornness, a settlement that the howling winds had tried to erase 1,000 times and failed. The long houses huddled together like exhausted warriors after battle, their sod roofs heavy with snow, their smoke holes breathing thin gray columns into the bitter sky. This was not a place of comfort. This was a place of survival.
The night Eirik was born, the fjord itself seemed to groan. A midwinter blizzard screamed down from the mountains with the fury of something ancient and wrathful, as though the sea serpent Jörmungandr stirred in the depths far below, exhaling cold death upward through the black water. Fires trembled in their hearths. The shadows on the longhouse walls writhed and danced like trapped spirits. And inside the forge-warmed hut of the blacksmith Bjorn, a woman named Astrid cried out once, and then cutting through the storm's roar came a child's first breath. They called the boy Eirik. His father Bjorn was a man whose hands knew iron better than they knew tenderness, a blacksmith of formidable reputation, a warrior who had laid down his sword to beat it into plowshares and axe heads, who sang while he worked as though the ringing of hammer on steel was a kind of prayer. His mother Astrid was something rarer, a shield maiden who had walked battlefields not to fight, but to carry the souls of the fallen to Freya. She had seen death 100 times and looked it calmly in the face. These were Eirik's bloodlines: fire and iron, courage and compassion.
The boy grew in the strange way that marked children touched by fate. Faster than others, quieter than others, heavier in the eyes. By the time most children were chasing goats through mud, Eirik would sit at the edge of the fjord for hours, staring into the gray water as if reading words beneath its surface. He spoke little. He watched everything. And when sleep took him, the dreams came, vivid, enormous, impossible dreams that the child could not have invented himself. At the center of each dream stood a tree. Not a tree of wood and leaf, but something vast beyond reckoning. Its crown piercing clouds, its roots plunging into worlds below worlds.
Always in those dreams, a voice came. Not the voice of any man or woman Eirik had ever heard. It was older than language, deeper than thunder, and it spoke with the weight of something that had watched the universe assemble itself from nothing. "Your blood will break the branch, Eirik," the voice said, echoing from somewhere behind the sky. "The broken branch will either save the world or unmake it." The child would wake gasping, his furs damp with cold sweat, heart hammering against his ribs. He told no one. Even at 5 years old, something in him understood that this knowledge was a burden to be carried alone.
Years carved Eirik from soft boyhood into something harder. The village watched him grow and felt uneasy about what they saw. By his 20th year, he stood over 6 feet, built like a longship's mast, lean but iron solid, every movement precise and economical as a blade stroke. His hair was the dark brown of wet bark, worn long and usually braided back from a face that could have been cut from the same gray granite as Skjern's cliffs. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, a nose broken once in a training bout and healed slightly crooked. His eyes were the color of storm clouds on the horizon, that particular gray that promises violence. The young warriors of Skjern called him Storm Eye. The older men simply stepped aside when he passed.
It was in the autumn of his 21st year that shadow fell on Skjern. The leaves had turned the colors of dying embers, and the first frost had begun glazing the morning ground when a figure appeared at the edge of the village. An old merchant, they thought at first, hooded and staff-carrying, selling amber and silver-worked pins from a pack too large for one man to carry easily. He moved wrong, though. Something in his step was too light, too fluid, as though his feet were merely suggesting contact with the ground rather than committing to it. He smiled too easily. His eyes shifted color when the light caught them, now amber, now green, now the silver of a freshly sharpened knife.
The merchant found Jarl Harald on his high seat in the great hall, drinking the last of summer's mead. Harald was the kind of man that power makes worse, born with enough that greed had room to grow unchecked. He was broad and heavy, with a warrior's old muscle now running to fat at the edges, a red-gold beard streaked with gray, eyes the pale, washed-out blue of shallow winter water. He had been Jarl for 11 years and had spent most of them wanting more. More land, more thralls, more gold, more fear from his neighbors. The merchant leaned close and spoke words too quiet for Harald's household guards to hear. By the time he finished, Harald was smiling the smile of a man who has just been told he can have everything he wants.
That night Skirn burned. It began without warning. No drum of approaching longships, no shout of raiders from the watch. Harald's own men, those who had feasted with their neighbors the previous week, rose in the dark hours and put torch to thatch. Later, those few who survived would say the attackers moved like men dreaming. Eyes glazed, mouths slack, doing terrible things with the absent expressions of sleepwalkers. Loki's enchantment, the survivors would whisper, the trickster's venom in their blood, burning out their choices and leaving only obedience. The village screamed. Fire leapt from roof to roof as though hungry for company.
Bjorn died with his axe in his hand, which was the death he would have chosen. He had time to drag 3 of Harald's men into the dark with him before a spear found the gap between his shoulder blades. Astrid lasted longer. She had her shield, and she had her training, and shield maidens of Freya did not go easily into any darkness. She stood in the doorway of the burning hut and held it until the arrows came too thick and fast to deflect. Eirik, already bleeding from a gash across his ribs where a sword had kissed him, caught her as she fell. She looked up at him with absolute clarity in her dying eyes, the same calm she had brought to 100 battlefields. "Run, my son," she said. "Odin watch you. Do not forget Loki's name."
He ran. The trees of the great pine forest swallowed him whole. Behind him, Skirn's death-glow orange lit the sky. Eirik ran until his legs gave out, stumbling through root-tangled darkness, branches raking his face, the cold working its fingers through his torn chainmail and into the wound at his ribs. When he finally collapsed against a boulder deep in the forest's black heart, he was certain he was dying. The bleeding would not stop. The cold was past feeling now, which he knew was the worst sign. He lay with his cheek against the snow-dusted stone and thought about nothing, which was easier than thinking about everything he had just lost.
They came to him then, 2 ravens, dropping from the darkness above as silently as falling ash. They landed in the snow beside his face and regarded him with eyes that held something no bird's eyes should hold. Intelligence, ancient and calculating, and something that was not quite pity, but was perhaps its older cousin. Hugin and Menin. Thought and memory. The All-Father's eyes in the world. One of them leaned close to his ear, so close he could feel the cold air displaced by its beak, and spoke in a voice like wind through a cracked door. "Give an eye for knowledge, Eirik Bjornsson. See your fate, or close both eyes now, and let the cold take you.
What happened next, Eirik never described in full to anyone for the rest of his life. Those who later asked received only a silence so complete it functioned as an answer. He made his choice. The act was done with the certainty of a man leaping from a cliff top. The moment before commitment may hold doubt, but the leap itself does not. There was a sound. There was pain beyond language's capacity to describe it. A white, hot erasure of everything except the single overwhelming fact of agony. And then, as though the pain had been a door and the eye its key, the door blew open. The vision arrived like a flood tide.
He saw Yggdrasil, not as the child dream had shown it, abstract and distant, but immense and real, filling all of creation from its roots in Niflheim's ice to its crown brushing the ceiling of Asgard. And on one of its great upper branches, he saw the crack. It ran through the wood like a fracture through ice, dark and spreading, leaking something that was not sap. Something darker, thicker, the color of old blood. He understood without being told. When that branch broke fully, the tremor would shake every realm. The dead would walk. The frost giants would pour through gaps in the worlds. The gods themselves would fall at Ragnarok. Ahead of its time, ahead of fate's own schedule, forced by treachery.
Then Odin spoke. The Allfather did not appear. He was simply present, the way the cold is present in winter, everywhere and unavoidable. His voice was the deep resonance of mountains settling, of glaciers moving, of time itself grinding forward. Eirik, one-eyed wolf, you are chosen. Not because you are the mightiest, but because you are willing to pay what others will not. Your road is soaked in blood. 3 divine forces will aid you. 3 will test you. And the last will offer you a choice that will cost you everything you love. Rise and make your oath. Eirik, bleeding in the dark and the snow, rose. He did not know yet what everything meant. He would learn.
She found him at dawn. The Volva Ingrid moved through the winter forest with the ease of someone who had walked it for decades, which she had. She was old in the way mountains are old, not withered but compressed, all unnecessary softness long since worn away to leave something dense and essential. She was perhaps 60 years of age, though she might have been more, with iron-gray hair worn in complex braids threaded with tiny rune-carved bones, a face deeply lined and sharp-featured, dark eyes that catalogued everything they saw with unsentimental precision. She served Freya. She had felt the goddess's attention shift northward the previous night, like a hand turning a compass needle, and she had followed it.
"The price was steep," Ingrid said, crouching beside him and examining the wound with the clinical detachment of someone who had dressed 1,000 worse. "But Odin's road always is. I have been walking to you since midnight." She bound his eye socket with practiced efficiency, packed the wound at his ribs with dried yarrow and moss, and fed him something from a clay vial that burned going down but immediately dragged him back from the edge of the abyss where he had been hovering. When he was strong enough to sit, she told him what the goddess had told her. "You will find Harald. He belongs to Loki now. Entirely. Not merely influenced, but possessed in his purpose. But hear me. The price of revenge will be your heart. Freyja will give you her gift. She will also take something equal in return."
In the weeks that followed, Eirik healed and planned. The forest was his forge now. He felled timber, shaped planks with axe and adze, bent and shaped the ribs of a vessel that grew slowly in a hidden cove where a cold stream met the fjord's edge. His eye socket healed to a sealed scar, puckered and pale. He carved a leather patch and wore it without shame. Odin himself had paid the same price for wisdom, and if the comparison was presumptuous, the parallel was still steadying. He named the ship before the last plank was nailed, Broken Branch, Black-sailed, Dragon-prowed, a name and a declaration both.
The first to join him was Gunnar. He appeared at the edge of the cove one gray morning without announcement, simply standing there with a battle axe across his shoulders like a yoke, watching Eirik work with an expression of assessment that eventually resolved into satisfaction. Gunnar was enormous, 2 inches taller than Eirik and half again as broad, with the kind of mass that was not fat but simply more of everything. More bone, more muscle, more presence. He was 28 years old, with a shaved head that showed the blue-black tattoos covering his scalp, a red-brown beard worn short and dense, and eyes the bright sky blue of a berserker's god-touched fury. He had been Thor's devoted man since he was old enough to hold a hammer. "My axe is yours," he said, without preamble. "Where do we sail?"
Ingrid had already decided she was coming without being asked. She had lived in the forest long enough and followed Freya's quiet urgings for 30 years without question. This felt like culmination, not coincidence. Around her neck she wore a pendant, a small fragment of amber set in silver, rune-carved, which held within it a splinter of something older than the pendant itself. A sliver of bone from the original Brisingame clasp, she claimed. Freya's legendary necklace. Whether the claim was literally true, no one could say, but the pendant's power was observable. Standing near her when she invoked it, a man might find his certainties becoming flexible, his hostilities softening. She carried it like a wound. "Each working takes a piece of me," she told Eirik plainly. "I will use it rarely, and when I can no longer feel Freya's warmth, the pendant goes into the sea."
Sigurd came last and said the least. He was lean where Gunnar was massive, quiet where the berserker was loud, a man built for economy in all things, including words. He was 30 years of age, with ash-blonde hair worn close-cropped, light gray eyes that moved with a watchfulness just short of paranoia, and a face that had clearly been handsome before something had worked very hard to trouble it. His right arm ended at the wrist, not in the ragged way of a battle wound, but in the clean seal of a deliberate sacrifice. A Tyre's mark. He had given the hand as an oath praise, and whatever that oath had been, its weight still lived in his eyes. "My past is dark," he said, meeting Eirik's single gray eye without flinching. "I ask only to fight for something clean." Eirik looked at him for a long moment. "Tyre's hand holds you. That is enough for me."
The Broken Branch was launched on a morning of iron-gray sky and iron-gray water, a day that felt appropriate. No ceremony of sun and gold, just the honest cold of a world that did not care about heroic departures. The 4 of them pushed the dragon-prowed vessel down the cove's shingle into the fjord. The black sail unfurled and caught a north wind with a sound like a sharp intake of breath. Eirik stood at the prow, one hand on the dragon's neck, and looked out across the dark water at a horizon he could not see. Somewhere beyond it, Harold sat in a stolen hall growing fat on Loki's bargain. Somewhere beyond it, the branch continued its slow fracture. He said nothing. He gripped the prow and let the ship move.
Their first intended landfall was an island at the border of Vanir territory, a wind-scoured place of standing stones and ancient sacrificial platforms where Freya's temple had stood for centuries. It was Ingrid's suggestion. "We go to the goddess first," she said, in a tone that admitted no argument. "Before swords, before strategy. She knows what waits in the waters ahead." 2 days of hard sailing brought them to the island through worsening weather, the wind building from insistent to threatening. The temple itself was carved from the island's native dark gray stone, its walls etched with the intertwined imagery of love and war. Freya's twin domains. Its entrance flanked by 2 carved cats the size of ponies, their stone eyes rubbed smooth by decades of supplicant hands.
Eirik knelt on the cold stone floor of the inner sanctuary and spoke his prayer plainly, the way his mother had taught him, not the performance of devotion but its substance. He asked for his mother's soul to be received with honor. He asked for the strength to carry what he had sworn to carry. He did not ask to survive. The air in the sanctuary changed. It became warmer, and it became heavier, and the quality of the light altered in a way that was not explained by any change in the torches. And then she was there. Not in the way of a human being standing in a room, but in the way the room itself had shifted to accommodate something that had always been there and was simply now making itself known.
You want revenge, Freya said, and her voice was the warm register that lives beneath grief. Every child who loses their parents wants this, but hear me carefully, Storm-Eye. Revenge without love at its center is only destruction wearing a purpose it borrowed. It will not hold. She looked at Ingrid, who stood at the sanctuary's edge with the pendant pressed against her sternum. I gave my fragment to Ingrid so that she could give it to you when the time comes. But listen, when you reach Harold, when you look at him and feel the fire, remember what you are doing it for: the living, not just the dead. Her gaze returned to Eirik, and in it he saw something that made him uncomfortable. She was not just looking at him in this moment. She was looking at something that had not happened yet, and what she saw there did not entirely please her.
She was still speaking when Gunnar's voice crashed through the sanctuary from outside. A berserker's bellow, which meant something had gone past urgent into immediate. They ran. Through the temple's entrance, out between the stone cats, onto the wind-hammered promontory, and there across the darkening water were sails. Not one. 7. Harold's fleet, moving with the unnatural speed of Loki's interference, cutting through the chop with their black and red dragon prows, angled directly toward the island. Too fast. Too many. The broken branch sat in the cove below them with a crew of 4, and Harold's ships carried warriors enough to fill a small army.
The sea battle was chaos ordered only by courage and the geography of the narrow cove. Gunnar did not fight in the way other men fight. He became something else. The berserker state was not a metaphor, and watching it happen was deeply unsettling. The great man's eyes blanked to pure white blue. His movements ceased to be human-paced. His voice dropped to a register that was felt in the chest before it was heard. He leapt the rail before the first of Harold's ships was close enough to board, caught the enemy vessel's prow, and began working his axe in the way a man works when he has given himself over to something larger than his own will. Timber cracked. The dragon-head prow split down the center. The ship's mast fell.
Ingrid fought from the deck with her pendant blazing. She did not fire arrows with a bow. Her weapon was older. She held the amber fragment in her palm and spoke in a language that had no modern words left in it. And the arrows she sent flew with unerring accuracy to find their marks in ways that suggested guidance. Enemy warriors hesitated, their attack stuttering as confusion crossed their faces. Freya's influence, bleeding doubt into the violence. But with each working, Ingrid's face grayed a shade more, and her grip on the pendant loosened. The price was being paid in real time, and the currency was herself.
Then Loki moved the wind. That was all it took, a casual gesture from a trickster who had been watching with the amusement of someone who knows how the game ends. The gale reversed in an instant, shifting from behind the broken branch to against it, and simultaneously the sea bottom reared up in the form of a submerged reef that had not been there an hour before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and Loki had simply rearranged what was visible. The broken branch went onto the rocks with a sound like the world ending on a budget. The hull screamed. The mast snapped. The crew went into the water or onto the stone, and the dark sea accepted all of them with equal indifference.
Eirik came back to consciousness on a black pebble beach with the taste of salt and blood sharing his mouth equally. Every rib on his left side informed him they had opinions about what had just happened. He sat up. Gunnar lay nearby, groaning but breathing, a gash across his forehead that would scar impressively. Ingrid sat a few yards further up the beach, wringing seawater from her braids with the expression of someone who found the situation irritating rather than existential. Of Sigurd, there was no sign. Eirik scanned the dark water. Nothing. He stood, which cost him, and surveyed the wreckage of the broken branch jutting from the reef 50 yards offshore, and did not allow himself to feel what he felt, because feeling it would end him.
He built a small fire with driftwood and the flint in his belt pouch that had survived the wreck. As the flames caught and the 3 survivors dried themselves in silence, Eirik looked out at the dark water where Harald's ships had retreated. They had not pressed the advantage, which told him Loki preferred his suffering to continue rather than end. The trickster wanted him alive and in pain. That was useful information. The fire crackled. A raven landed on a rock above them, 1 raven, not 2, and watched him with the unreadable patience of divine attention. Eirik stared back at it. "I know," he said aloud, "to the raven, to Odin, to the night. This is only the beginning."
Somewhere out in the dark water, Sigurd was either dead or surviving on the strength of an oath to Tyr, and either way the matter was not resolved. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Harald sat in his hall laughing with a god who would ultimately consume him. And in the roots of everything, in the wood of the world tree itself, the crack continued its patient work. Eirik pressed his palm against the cold pebbles of the beach and felt the ground's solidity under his fingers. Real, actual present. He had lost his home, his parents, his ship, and perhaps a crew member. He had 1 eye, 3 companions, and an oath. He had been at the bottom before. He was acquainted with the bottom. The bottom, he had learned, is not where things end. It is where they begin. The saga of the broken branch had just started, and Loki's laughter even now rode the retreating wind. But for the first time, it sounded slightly less certain of itself. For the first time, just barely. It sounded like it was trying too hard.
Loved this story. The ravens have spoken, but fate is still unwritten. Drop a comment below. Do you think Eirik will defeat Harald, or will Loki's curse consume him? Like this video to keep the saga alive, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of Yggdrasil's Broken Branch. Your support for G's the next episode. And like, share, and subscribe for your daily dose of Norse saga.